Thanks, John. So I'm just a farmer, but I'm going to change the world. How many of you know why you get up in the morning? Why you were created, what you were put on the earth to do, what you think about before you go to bed, what you think about when you wake up in the morning, that you'll act for 2 or 3 years of your life and not get paid. So I was watching a movie a while ago with my wife. I saw this quote. Many of you probably have heard it. I had never heard it. That 2 of the most important days in your life are the day that you're born and the day that you find out why. For me, the reason why I was born or why I was put on this earth seems to be to change the food system. My wife used to hate it because it's what drove me. It consumes me. And living with me, you have to take a back seat to that, which I'm sure is not the most unpleasant thing to do. But when I saw that quote, and I was thinking about doing this presentation, I thought I should add one more day to that. So for me, the other reason why the other profound day in my life was the day I got married. And it's probably not for the reason why you think. So my wife is probably going to blush when she sees this and hears this because she had no idea I was going to do this. But the strange reality was that this country slicker had to go halfway around the world to a different culture, to an urban center the size of Toronto, to learn about food. That my wife and her culture were the instigators of my passion towards food. So she hates it, but she started it. So I was supposed to talk to you about the power of local food, which I will do, but I needed to dial it in a little bit more, to make it more specific. So how many of you like comfort food? Macaroni, the Kraft dinner, the mac and cheese, mashed potatoes, chicken soup, things like that. Pizza. So I'm not going to talk to you about comfort food. As a few weeks ago, I got not a revelation, but an eye-opening experience about how to change this and dial it in a little bit more, so that I can give you the tools to see how powerful local food can be. So today, you can write it in your book, my topic has shifted from comfort food to uncomfortable food. And I'm going to tell you the story of my life and how I got to this point of embracing uncomfortable food. So, 2005 is when this all started. This gentleman is not who I'm speaking about because I didn't want to give away this person's identity, but he did look a lot like this guy. So I went to a local farmer-based meeting in Chatham Kent at a restaurant. And we're standing there waiting to get our food. And the buffet starts moving, and this farmer's standing beside me. Then we walk up to the server, and she looks at us and asks, "Would you like some eggs?" My friend said, "Sure, but what local farm do they come from?" I kind of looked at him shocked, because everybody in the line knew that that wasn't food from a local farm. And the woman looked at him kind of bewildered, like, "Why would you ask that question?" And he said to her something that has started me on this journey and that profoundly struck me was, he said, "If I don't ask the question and demand it of you, then how are you going to change your market and your system to what I want?" And so there began the journey. And so we went back to the table, and I sat and I looked at him and I said, "You know, that was the stupidest question you could have asked her, right?" And he said, "Yeah." So I said, "Well, why did you ask it?" And so he looked at me and said, well, if I don't ask it, how do they know what I want? And the lady's response was kind of indicative of the topic of uncomfortable food, that she looked at him and said sheepishly that we don't get our products from local farms. We get it from the mass distribution system, which Dave touched on earlier. And she actually said, she admitted, we don't even know what farm they come from. He said that was fine. Fast forward 4 or 5 years up till today's present state. So that question started to haunt me. So I started going to restaurants or eating out places by myself, with my wife, with friends. And if you've eaten out with me, you've experienced this. Because that question started to just linger in my mind, and he asked it. And I saw what it did to that lady. It made her uncomfortable, but for good reasons, especially in a community like Chatham Kent. So my wife often goes out for dinner with me, and I usually get an elbow or something because she knows that the question's coming. And she just doesn't want me to ask it because she doesn't want her food to be spit on. Which, I don't know if it's true, but I've seen enough movies that hint at it, so I'll let you decide that. But the other part was, and I'll do this quietly because I don't know how it's going to work on the microphone, but you just have to hear the collective horking when I walk into a restaurant or when people know that I'm in their establishment. So, on my journey, well, and the other part I want to go back, because if I go back to this gentleman, I didn't tell the story to mock him or to belittle him. He did look a lot like this guy, which kind of makes me laugh sometimes. And maybe we don't choose to look this way, but it was the life lesson that I learned that I hope you can learn from me. Was that sometimes the answer is looking at you, right in front of you, and you don't see it. Second stage, or as Anthony said, Paul 2.0. So these two are my children. I hope you think they're beautiful. We do. And this was the next stage. Our oldest is almost 5, so it's kind of the same timeline. But once you start having children and you start thinking about future generations and what kind of impact you're leaving on society, the earth, you really start and be a little bit more reflective and step back to see what kind of world you're leaving for them, because these children or your children or anybody's children really have no say in how I do things, how I consume products, more importantly how I farm, unless I start and think about them and their future generations. So about that time, I also came across an organization called Growing Chefs in London, Ontario, run by my now good friend, Andrew Fleet. And some of you may know we've worked hard to try and bring them to Chatham Kent, because I think that what Andrew does is super important. And it's also, I've seen the impact and I've seen the power. And I'll tell you one story about it, and it goes back to this underlying theme of uncomfortable food. So Andrew's has lots of parents that come up and talk to him. They like what he does, they support him. So one day he was in the grocery store, or out, and a mother came up to him, and he had spoken to her, so he was familiar with her. He knew she liked the program. He knew that her child was benefiting greatly because of the discussions they were having over the dinner table and such. But the mother said to him, "I don't really like you." And he looked at her and said, "Well, what do you mean?" Because she said it in a pleasant way and with a smile on her face. And she said, "You know, it's getting really hard to go grocery shopping because of you." So Andrew asked for more information, and she said, "Well, when I bring something back to the cart, my son looks at me and says, 'Mom, is that local?'" And the other example he gave was that Mom, there's a part that they learn in the program with Andrew and Growing Chefs was, Mom, are those carrots in season? And she said, you know, you're making my life miserable. Because this kid is asking a very simple question that they seem to understand that we can't. That an apple from Chatham Kent is better than an apple from British Columbia. For so many reasons. You can get into all those topics. And so they talked, and Andrew just shared with me that it was just an interesting experience because the child was the one asking the questions of the marketplace that they were demanding to know. And remember that this is a kid under 10. So he's asking his mom and expecting something from her out of what he learned through their program. And the other part that I wanted to impress, because I've heard it several times, I've seen it on a lot of TV shows. Most recently I heard a celebrity chef talk about it, but if you give a young child, a food experience, a truly authentic, real food experience, it will impact them for the rest of their life. Things like picking grapes in a grapevine and eating it right off the grapevine, going to a farm, picking eggs out of a chicken coop, pulling a carrot out of the ground and eating it. That all these things that they're starting to find, and there's research behind it now, that all those sensory experiences that that child has at that very moment will go with them for the rest of their life. So even if it's 20, 30, or even 40 years later, if they go back to that same experience, and this is what the chef did, and she bit into a grape that she remembers having as a toddler, all the sensory experiences came back to her. And it's part of why I like working with Andrew, is because if you can impress those ideas on the children now, they can't walk away from it and they can't get away from it because it will stay with them. And it's something that we've tried to do with our children. Might be easier for us. We live on a farm. Most of you don't live on a farm, but I would challenge every one of you to get a little uncomfortable and take some time and go out and visit a farm. Talk to a farmer. Try the food, experience the food. Because again, sometimes the things that you're looking for are sitting right in front of you and you don't even see it. So the last point in this evolution, this is Paul 3.0 now, was my wife is underlying all of this, because if you've married into a different culture and ethnicity, you can see the two sides of the coin because they're right beside each other. And so my wife, the whole time, like, she came here, and she's going to watch this, so this will really make me some positive marks from my wife. So she couldn't even boil water when she came to Canada. But she spent the first couple of months on Skype with her mom learning how to cook. And I'm happy to report, you can't tell, but that she's probably one of the best cooks that I know now. So it started to impress upon me that even though she didn't know how to cook, she was willing to go to those steps. And because her culture, food is much more transparent and much more direct from the farm, that she's used to that. But it also started to wake me up to what our reality is as the North American food system. That we've been married for 8 years, so to go back and forth between Ecuador and Canada, you can start to see things. One of the things that I see is the fact that places like KFC and McDonald's didn't used to exist in Ecuador 15, 20 years ago. They're now becoming more prominent. They're taking over. It's kind of the same cycle that's happened here. What comes with it? Obesity, health problems are your main things. But underneath of it is the fact that they're losing their food culture. Because the kids don't put any value on it. They don't know how to cook. And like my wife, they don't really have to, because their parents usually take it for granted and don't teach them. But the other reality, when my wife came to North America, she had to learn, or her culture would disappear. So she did. And I think a lot of you have probably had the same experience if you think about it, that you go to a country or a place outside of North America. You probably fall in love with the food, think it's the best food you've ever had in your life. And you come back here and you realize how crappy the food is here. I had it. It was actually what started this whole process way back, was at our civil wedding. We had some sausages, and I came back and I'm like, I want to find those sausages because that was the best thing I'd ever eaten in my life. And I found somebody to make them. But it's this idea that we think everywhere else in the world has great food. They don't. Argentina is one of the biggest buyers of our beef in the world. Our food, the problem is that nobody seems to care about it and seems to want to make it anymore and take care of the processes that we're making it. This leads me to my last story. So when my wife came to North America, she started learning how to cook, and at that time I was working, she was not, so she decided we were having pork chops for supper one night. We didn't have any pork. Usually we had pork or beef or chicken or whatever from our farm or from a local farm. And so there was a high quality to it that most people aren't used to. And my wife came here and just started eating it, so she really didn't realize that. So she went to the grocery store and bought pork chops. They didn't look like this. This is what my wife wanted them to look like. But she cooked them up. She worked hard all day. And then we sat down to eat them, and the taste, the flavor, the texture, everything. She was absolutely disgusted. And she said to me, if we ever run out of meat again, please tell me, because I am not going to the grocery store to buy that stuff. Because in her culture, as I said, they have, the meat is just so much higher quality. I've been there at a farmer's market and watched an old gentleman carry in a quarter of a cow on his shoulder, throw it on the table, and then the butcher just cut it up and people bought it and took it away. It's not the reality here anymore. And the other reality is just what we seem to have settled for as a society, that food prostitution seems to be the key around here. You'll drive up to a window, you'll talk into a box, you'll get something ordered, and in 5 minutes they'll put it in a brown bag and they'll give it to you. And you can take it back to your house or you can eat it in the car. To me, I don't know, that's not how you treat food. Food, there's a sacred part to food that we've forgotten here. And my wife taught me this through her culture and through her food experiences. The other part being that my wife made a profound statement of several years ago upon observation of our food system and hers. And I left this picture up there I left this picture up here to highlight the point that, because I actually looked for a terrible picture of pork chops. I actually typed into the Google, crappy pork chops. and you know, you can't find bad looking food on the internet. But it goes to the point that my wife said, and her statement was that North Americans eat with their eyes, Latins, in her case, eat with their mouths and with their taste buds. To me, that was a profound statement. And then as I've progressed and started to watch things, that you talk about food marketing and different things and the pictures on the internet, that there isn't a bad picture of food. And that this fact that you can eat your meal with your family at a table, we're losing that. And we've forgotten how sacred that is, the ability to eat and enjoy it. You can enjoy it on the ground. And we've tried to instill that in our children as well. So, I love urban agriculture. Big fan. I don't know if anybody recognizes this picture. It's a place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin called Growing Power. And as a rural person and as a farmer, I would challenge us that we need to start looking at the models that the urban population is putting out around food. They're more intensive, they're more small scale, they're doing innovative and creative things. And frankly, it's mind-blowing how much food that place pumps out of the downtown. It's in a little community in downtown Wisconsin, and they feed that community. But, so there's the door. Why is food being produced in urban spaces? Why isn't food being produced where it belongs? In the rural economy. We talk about rural economic development. Food is what the rural economies used to be built on, the manufacturing, all the different parts. And it was actually a friend of mine who's working in this urban food space that said to me a year ago, and it's actually part of the reason why I chose to stand up here and say this, even though it may get me in trouble. But he said that the urban consumer is the one pushing the local food movement, and the urban people are the ones driving it. But what needs to happen and what needs to change is the rural economy needs to take up that lead and take up that fight and start leading in food production. I thought that was a pretty profound statement from somebody who lives in the city and didn't really work and live in the rural economy. So, we go back to my topic of uncomfortable food, and this is where the light went on in my head. So we take the word, my first premise was comfort food, scrapped it. We went to uncomfortable food. If you take the difference between the two words, it's unable. If we're unable to do all these things and bring food back into our economy and our society the way it needs to be, we're going to be in a whole lot of problems. And they're starting to happen now. And many of you have probably heard these different statements or wise proverbs that when something's easy to do, it's not worth it. But when something's hard to do, it's worth it. Even though it might kill you, and it will probably be the hardest thing we do as a society is to revamp our food system. So, since I can be potentially on the internet, I have to walk out of here with something stated and made clear. So I'll give you a big and a bold and an audacious statement. But before I do that, so I'm going to need, because I'm going to say this and I'm going to put myself out there, but I'm going to need you as a group to start making some noise after I say it to show the world that we actually believe this and we will actually get behind this. So, Dr. Martin Luther King had a statement that you're all probably familiar with. This statement that defined his life and he became famous for, that I have a dream. Like Dr. King, I have a dream. And my dream is that Chatham Kent owns local. More importantly, North America, that Chatham Kent is going to own local food.